Welcome to this video of the Gateway House Careers in International Affairs series. Today we have with us Kishore Mandhyan. He is a member of the State Advisory Council to the Maharashtra State Executive of the Aam Aadmi Party and its Political Education and Training Committee. He is also presently the lead for the Jan Samvad Abhiyan, the Citizens Dialogue Initiative. Between 2007 and 2012, he was Political Director and Deputy Director for Peacekeeping, Human Rights and Humanitarian Affairs in the Cabinet of the Secretary General of the United Nations. From 1993 until 2007, he led political and civil operations as part of UN peace missions and transitional administrations in the former Yugoslavia, Cyprus, Kuwait, Middle East, and Iraq. Prior to the UN, he taught international relations and comparative politics at Boston College, Tufts University, and Harvard University. He has also worked at the World Bank and at the Save Bombay Committee. In the second interview, he shares his advice for students looking to pursue a career at the United Nations. So, if we could just rewind a little to the beginning of your career. I have a three-part question. The first of which is, what was it that actually drew you towards a career at the United Nations?
Okay, so let's take first things first. What drew me to the United Nations? See, you're a kid and you don't have an idea of what you want to do. People keep asking you that. And I think I was fortunate enough to have a great class English teacher, actually. And she would come into class and ask us to write essays. If winter's here, can spring be far behind? In praise of walking. One day she came in and actually asked us to research an essay over about 10 days under the following rubric. Wherever dark clouds loom, the United Nations is empowered to resolve the crisis. Discuss. This was 9th grade. She asked us to go to the libraries, the USIS, the British Council, the Asiatic Library, and provide our thoughts. And that's where I discovered, actually, that there was such a thing as the United Nations. There was this body beyond countries. And in a sense, as a boy, I always felt confined, partly because of conditions at home, and you wanted to break through and see the world. I said, wow, there is something beyond my country. And I was also reading Tagore at that time, and there was this feeling that the more international you become, the more Indian you become. And the more Indian you are, you need to be more international. So there was these ideas going on in my mind. What does being a citizen of the world mean? Particularly when you read Tagore, that question comes up constantly. And then you had this question posed by Mrs. Gonzalez in school. And slowly by slowly I discovered, wow, you can actually go and be of service to the world between enemy lines, bring them together, and actually reporting to something beyond your domain, beyond your family, beyond your tribe, beyond your country. And I think that was very, very exciting for me. So that's what drew me to the United Nations. I had one more thing to the last observation, is I remember meeting an uncle of mine during that formative period of 16, 17, 18, when you're discovering yourself. And he instilled into me the idea that don't ever be limited by wanting to do only one thing in life. If you feel like doing it, do it. But you can do many things and you can do them well. And that's where the notion that, boy, why should I be limited to making money or pursuing power or pursuing knowledge or pursuing the spirit? Why can't I do all of them? And that's what the UN provided. It provided a livelihood. It provided that spirit that you are in the service of humanity. It provided a sense where diplomacy and politics came together. And of course, it required tremendous inputs of ideas and knowledge and concepts from a multidisciplinary perspective, because I didn't want to be limited to economics, politics, or law. I wanted to do it all. And that's what led me to the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy to do an interdisciplinary degree, and at the same time helped me to translate what I had studied into actual work on the ground.
So, what were some of the exams or qualifications that you required?
Okay, as you might well know, you at least need a master's degree to enter the professional arena in the United Nations. and it should be in the relevant field that you want to. So if you want to be an international lawyer in the UN, then it's good to have a legal degree. If you want to be involved with peacekeeping, then I think you need to have a background in political science, international relations, sociology, anthropology. If you want to go to the development side, then you need sociology, anthropology, international relations, and exposure to international humanitarian and human rights law. And on the development side, to international political economy. So I was fortunate enough to do my undergraduate in physics and then do law school at Government Law College. And then when I went to the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, I read at an advanced graduate level international political economy, comparative diplomatic history, and global governance. So in a way, it brought everything together. But I think you don't have to necessarily go to an Ivy League school. You can have a good master's degree from most schools, but there is a certain degree of elitism in the recruitment process because most institutions are not very well known, and you might have very good students in them. So I think that part is important to recognize. The second thing that is required is relevant work in the early part of your life, which is consistent enough, maybe a year and a half each, in some related activity. If you're interested in development or peace and security issues or human rights issues, then relevant work with your government on the ground, with a non-governmental organization on the ground. Maybe journalism, writing about these issues on the ground. So I think that's the second thing. The third thing that I think is required is very good communication skills. And I mean communication in the broadest sense, not just public speaking, and not just being a leader, but also being a follower and a team player. The third aspect of communication, I think is very important, is to listen. And empathy, to put yourself in somebody else's situation. So you can have that eye-to-eye and heart-to-heart contact. Most people mistake communication as good writing and speaking skills. But I think the other two I mentioned, listening and empathy, are equally important, probably more important if you want to excel. So I think that's important. Understanding of language, particularly the UN languages, is an asset. It's not always required. I didn't have it. I learned some of the languages later on. So that, I think, is vital. And gives you that extra edge if you don't have some of the other stuff. I think being sensitive to gender, being sensitive to difference, being sensitive to just a heterogeneous culture, and stepping out of your comfort zone, and the desire to do that is equally important. The thing which I encouraged and recruited a lot of young officers, middle-level officers over my 20-year period in the United Nations was speaking truth to power, ethics, integrity. In fact, I always felt you can buy somebody who's competent, but you can never buy somebody who's one of character. And since one of the basic norms of UN administration is impartiality between governments, impartiality between your own government and the rest of the international system, then I think that sense of impartiality, accountability, speaking truth to power, to be able to tell your boss, I disagree with you in a nice way, is very, very important.
In your opinion, what does the UN look for in candidates today?
I would say that the basic qualifications of competence are very important. That is your background. The qualities of hard work are extremely important. I think you can become brilliant by being extremely committed to your work. And if you love your work, you don't say, I'm going for a holiday, because your holiday is work and your work is holiday. I never felt that in my 20 years, that I had to get away. I never felt stressed. I took my family to the war zones, broke the rules, because I felt that they must see what I am seeing and get out of their comfort zone. And when you do that, I think you immediately create an empathy with people who are on the ground, who are going through that violence. And so I think that's important. And then there are issues of integrity, which I mentioned. So these are issues of heart, body, mind, and soul. And be kind to people, be kind to your colleagues. Give the benefit of doubt to your seniors that sometimes they do things for reasons which you may not know because you're not sitting in that room. And also, keep your door open to anyone. If you do this, and these are basic human things, you don't need to go to graduate school, you don't need leadership courses. This is what I think can help people a lot. And I think it's very, very important to read and travel. That I think is fundamental. I'd taken backpacks and gone across this country. I came from a ghetto of South Bombay, all the top schools and these so-called high-fluted clubs. And if you don't break away from them, you actually get a very superficial perspective of the world. So I think travel is very important, and reading biography, history, comparative literature, beyond the social sciences is equally important.
And arguably the most important question, how did you actually manage to break into the United Nations?
I think, good question. Actually, as I mentioned earlier, and I need to re-emphasize this, that first and foremost, like any other standard entry process into a national domain in the public sphere, within the UN too, you have what are called entrance examinations. The National Competitive Examination, which is now called the Young Professionals Program. And it is in 4 different areas: political, socio-economic, media and cultural, and management and administration. So depending on what your interests are, you will take the exam in that. Now for Indians, there's a particular difficulty. And not only Indians, but most English-speaking countries which joined the UN earlier, they got heavily overstaffed, such as Sri Lanka, India, Pakistan, by officials from these countries. And then the Latin American countries and the African countries came in later. So there is a process of what you can call redressing the balance. So they're trying to fill positions in which the Africans were fewer to bring them up to par with the quota system, which essentially has been outlined for the UN based upon population data, based upon GDP, etc., etc. There is some complex formula by which they determine how many from each country at what different levels. But it's not strictly adhered to. It's a generic guide to recruitment, particularly at the professional level. So Indians, for example, are considered to be overstaffed. But from time to time, depending upon which of those 4 areas, positions do open up, but mostly for Indian women. Because on that account, we may be understaffed in certain areas. So one needs to bear that in mind. The second is that people can enter through secondment, their government support them. That is a very small number of positions within the UN, and that's a rather ad hoc mechanism. There is a third way, which is to enter at the mid-level once you've become an expert in your domain, whether it's human rights, whether it's peace and security issues, whether it is migration, whether it's a particular aspect of development, where you can come in as an expert or a consultant, having acquired the experience and the qualifications, and develop the links. That's possible. The fourth is to choose dangerous assignments and go into the peacekeeping world and show that you really are a field person. And that's how I got in. Because what happens there is that you get a lot of responsibility. You meet some of the brightest and the best from the headquarters who come there simply because they're tired of New York and Geneva and Vienna. And as a result, once you create those bonds under conditions of conflict, if you show merit and you develop those relationships, you get drawn into the system through that. And of course, fifth, at the political level, you can be appointed at different points of time. Now, as I got more and more senior, the positions became more and more political. But once you're in and you proved your mettle, then it's unlikely that you're let go, and your contracts get longer and longer. And today, while there are no permanent contracts in the UN, there are contracts which essentially support you for longer periods, and so that's how one might get in different ways.
At one stage in your career, you also taught international relations at Boston College, Tufts University, and Harvard University. What was that experience like?
See, as I mentioned earlier, that in my encounters with some elders in the family, they had said, Kishore, you must try to do everything if you want to. They saw that I wanted to do things differently and get out of the comfort zone of business which my family was in. I studied law thinking I would practice law, but I joined law essentially to be able to meet my girlfriend at Jain College. So I was at government law college for those reasons. But I studied it nonetheless. And after that, I said, how do I break away from the physics background? Because India is extremely narrow, even today, that you want to move to the liberal arts and sciences. And that's why I began to apply abroad for a graduate program, which would essentially take me through the physical sciences, social sciences, and the humanities. And that happened at the Fletcher School. So once that happened, I feel that it took me a while to say, well, what do you want to do? And getting into the UN was quite difficult. Sometimes you wrote letters and you got no replies. At that time, it wasn't as professionalized and organized as it is now. And so I said, well, you want to be a thinker and a doer. So why you've studied all this stuff, so start thinking about it. And whenever you have an opportunity, start doing about it. So that took me to the World Bank, that took me to the Safe Bombay Committee here, it brought me to politics here in the Padyatra with former Prime Minister Chandrasekhar. It got me into the Chipko Andolan movement. And I said, I'll do a 360. Wherever a door opens, I'll get involved. And I looked at the peace architecture as not only just peace and security, but human rights and humanitarian stuff, and also development and environment stuff. And I said, I've done an interdisciplinary degree. So once I started doing that, I realized that there were certain doors beginning to open. The World Bank opened, the Greenpeace opened, and teaching opened up. So I was a teaching fellow at Harvard initially. And here I was a teaching fellow for Professor Joseph Nye, who was a wonderful professor. And he was actually teaching a course which Henry Kissinger used to teach at Harvard many, many years ago. So when I taught that course, it was a course about the evolution of conflict from ancient Greece to modern times. And I learned so much. And since I was taking the sections and teaching that, and I didn't know that they were judging us. And I got the Best Teachers Award, the prize for excellence. That gave me a tremendous amount of confidence that I could switch from physics to other disciplines at one of the best universities in the world. And even though Harvard is very large, its house system sort of creates a very human scale. So that was one lesson from Harvard. The second is that Tufts is a rather small college, but it's a very international college. And then I met students from all over the world. And it has a European institute in Annecy, France, where I used to teach as adjunct in the summer, and it has an urban and environmental policy institute. And I was very interested, after my formal studies were getting over, to look at the relationship between state and society, but also state, society, and nature. So I developed courses on international political ecology, going beyond international political economy. And the Tufts Environmental and Policy Department allowed me to do that. So they were open. I could design a course, even though it was out of the box, and I taught it for many years. And then I sort of then ramped that up into a course in international public policy, which I used to teach at the European Institute in France in Annecy, which was only 1 hour away across the border from Geneva in Switzerland. And that course, what I did with the students was to take them each week to a different international organization in Geneva on issues of peace and security, development, environment, human rights, and humanitarian assistance. So International Red Cross and Federation, the International Red Cross Committee, the UN refugee and human rights organizations were all there. And that brought me into contact with the UN. And the thinking and the doing was coming together. And the third was, of course, Boston College, where I was full-time faculty. And at Boston College, it's a Jesuit institute. There was an amazing capstone seminar which I had to teach besides the introductory international relations courses and international organization courses, which was called the Faith, Peace and Justice Program. How do you bring ethics to issues of international public policy? And it was taught jointly by someone from the theology department, from the political science department, which was me, and third from the philosophy department. So we took issues of international intervention, euthanasia, abortion, and asked the basic question that a policy calculus gives you this option or these options. What does a spiritual and an ethical calculus give you? And I think that brought me to an appreciation of ethics and international relations, which doesn't always occur in formal programs of international relations studies. And by the time that was happening, I was attending conferences and I got into the United Nations. So, in a way, you sandwiched yourself between thinking and doing, and then finally you came to your Mount Everest or Kanchenjunga or Nanda Devi, which you had dreamt of in that 9th grade class.
And finally, what advice do you have for students today looking to pursue a path similar to yours?
See, it's very difficult to give advice to somebody else. In a way, I muddled through. And I was a slow learner. I was not particularly a brilliant student. But, and everyone comes from a different platform. But I can say that there are certain things which probably generically, if you follow, you're unlikely to go wrong. Most important is to look within. What is it that you want? And then look out and see what is available. And if you can do that exercise during your formative years, you might get an answer. You not necessarily will. And if it takes time, create a space for yourself to make that final decision, not now, but as you go along. Because nothing is final in life. Second is, I wanted to be involved in my lifetime where I brought life, career, and job together. I didn't want to be in an office. My dad wanted me to be an engineer. And I said, I don't want to go to the factory floor. And I imagined that I didn't want to read dirty legal briefs going to the High Court for the rest of my life. I wanted to be out there in the field, dealing with human issues on a 360 basis. I wanted to go beyond a very limited domain, wanted to travel, wanted to look at all the world's heritage sites. And I said the UN is the place. So there has to be a passion just beyond saying I have to collect a salary. I also think that, as I mentioned earlier, you don't necessarily have to be brilliant to do these things. Actually, 99% of it is perspiration, and you can work at brilliance, and it comes over a period of time. But you also have to be kind, and you have to be open to people. And if you give yourself a sense that I'm in a decathlon and not a single sprint race, and I have a plan A, plan B, plan C, and however high that plan A may be, sometimes your plan C can become plan A, provided you prepare for it. And if you give life 200%, then you're likely to get a career which is 100% career. If you aim for Mount Everest, you can land on Kanchenjunga and Nanda Devi, and they are still very high. So I would say, think big, work very hard, don't compare yourself to others. Set your own standards of excellence. That is important. And get out of the networking game, get out of the technology game, and get out of the game in which you're always constructing your bio and trying to manipulate it to make it look more impressive with action verbs and bullet points, because at the end of the day, it goes into the waste paper basket. That nobody looks at it for more than 2 minutes. And it is not about where you come from, it is what you know and who you are. You can buy anybody, but you can't buy a person of integrity and character. And that has to reflect in your interview, that has to reflect in your being. And you may even make it to the UN, but at the end of the day, if you want to really excel and get into the most interesting jobs, I think character, integrity, competence, hard work, and being good to your fellow human beings and having empathy, as I mentioned earlier, is fundamental.
Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us, Mr. Mandhyan, and for that extremely interesting and informative interview.
Thank you. My pleasure.
If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to post them in the section below. And please follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and SoundCloud. Thank you.